We thought we knew what to expect coming back to the US, but boy, were we wrong.
After 16 years in Mexico, San Francisco feels completely different. Some of it shocking, some of it heartbreaking, and some of it just strange.
From skyrocketing prices to self-driving taxis, we're sharing the biggest surprises, the things that don't feel like home anymore, and how it feels to experience reverse culture shock firsthand.
Stick around, this trip changed the way that we see the US forever.
So, I'm not sure why we decided to come to San Francisco smack in the middle of winter. We left in 80 degrees San Miguel de Allende to come to 50 degrees San Francisco, but here we are.
Walking the streets of San Francisco again brings back so many memories, but at the same time, things feel different.
Yeah, some things look exactly the same, but others, like the skyline, have changed a lot. There are so many new high-rises that weren't there before. It feels like I've been transported to a futuristic version of the San Francisco we knew.
I mean, it's been a long time since we lived there full time. We don't go home that often, not as often as we would like. Maybe a year and 8 months ago was the last time we had been back. It felt really different this time.
Yeah, something's happening. Maybe it's just time.
And us living in a different country, I think we've changed. One of the biggest differences we've noticed is how much the homelessness crisis has grown. There are way more encampments than we remember. I remember going back during COVID in 2020, and that's when I really started noticing the change of more homeless people, more than ever, and not just homeless people, but also lots of people with mental disorders and yelling and screaming and, just like really strange stuff, and we're used to that kind of stuff, having lived there our whole lives and grown up in different neighborhoods. When we were in our 20s, we lived in the Haight, and we got a lot of craziness in that time period, but it seems worse, way worse now.
It really does. It's heartbreaking because we don't really see as much of that in Mexico.
It made us think about why is that? In the US, homelessness is often linked to addiction, domestic violence, mental illness, PTSD, or young people getting kicked out of their homes.
But in Mexico, at least in the place we live, San Miguel de Allende, our home base, we've noticed that family structures play a huge role in preventing this. We know a young man, for example, that lives in our neighborhood who struggles with drug addiction. In the US, he'd probably be out on the street. But here, as humble as his family is, they keep him at home, supporting him however they can.
But one of the most shocking things we saw was how much downtown has changed.
Yeah, when we lived in San Francisco, downtown was always packed. Union Square was the heart of shopping and tourism, but now it just feels deserted.
And over by the cable car turnaround near Powell Street, so many big flagship stores like Gap, Nordstrom's, they're gone. And the Westfield Mall at the site of the old Emporium, it's empty, deserted, and that was a big mall with tons of activity, and poof.
That whole area was the epicenter of shopping in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Shopping, business, finance, and now there are so many shuttered stores and just not as many people walking the streets. I don't know, it makes you wonder if the whole work from home thing that started during COVID played a role in this. Fewer people commuting downtown means less customers, and businesses just couldn't keep up.
But I think a lot of businesses are making people go back to offices because there's lots of companies who are paying for offices that aren't being used, and I don't think that's going to happen anymore. So they want the workforce to come back, and so things might rejuvenate and get better.
Although your cousin's daughter, who used to work in an office building, headquarters for a big corporation, they're asking her to go back to work, but they have since sold that building, so that'll be interesting to see what happens to
where they all end up.
Her and her co-workers.
San Francisco just feels like a completely different city than the one we remember. It's different here in Mexico. New malls are still being built and people flock to them. Families still go to them to hang out. I think malls are a place to go, hang out with their families, kids run around, play, and they usually have fun activities and music and things going on. So it's not so much to go shopping, because I don't really think they shop that much.
Right.
Like when we go to the mall in Querétaro, I don't really see a lot of people with shopping bags, but I do see people at the Starbucks and the coffee shops and the families with their kids running around, and there's entertainment and things like that.
That's true. I wonder if in the States, the reason why there aren't as many people going to malls is because you can just get everything online. And so the custom of going to malls for shopping / socializing maybe just doesn't exist anymore.
One thing we had heard about in recent years but didn't fully grasp until we saw it in person was self-driving taxis.
Yeah, they work just like any other rideshare service, except there's no driver. While Antonieta was at the eye doctor's, I downloaded the app to see if we can give it a try. The company is called Waymo. It was surreal watching the car maneuver around double parked cars and other obstacles, and just the almost aggressive driving.
Right now we're riding in a driverless car share. Believe it or not, talk about culture shock in the United States coming from Mexico.
Do you remember when we were taking a left turn or a right turn and you would say, oh, it's a little fast?
Well, but it has it fríamente calculado, as El Chapulín would say. It has it just perfectly calculated.
I mean, for sure it does.
It didn't feel unsafe to me at all. But it did get confused when it went to go pick us up in a parking lot at the Safeway in the marina. There was lots of traffic, lots of cars, and it didn't know exactly where we were, and it kind of went by us, and then it went and made a turn, and then it came back, and then it stopped, and we were over here and it was over here, and we're like, I guess we need to go to it because it's going to continue to get confused. So that was weird.
I think the cars that were stopped waiting to get into parking spots really confused it.
We're throwing it off,
We can't help but wonder, how would this work in Mexico, especially in Mexico City?
It wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. It requires people following driving rules, staying in lanes, no sudden movements. It requires order. I think the driving in Mexico would be a little too chaotic for it to know.
Yeah, it would have to learn a whole different algorithm than in the States. Because, I mean, how many times have we seen people running across highways, the endless speed bumps and potholes? You know, I wonder if it would maneuver around potholes. Even in San Francisco, I wonder if the car would maneuver around the pothole.
Yeah, it wouldn't work. It would not work in Mexico.
No.
It just wouldn't. We always talk so fondly about the San Francisco fog, and it's kind of romanticized in our memories. I was never a fan of the fog. I didn't like it. You like the cold, and I never liked the cold.
Yeah, but after living in a place with over 300 days of sunshine and highs in the mid-70s and 80s, I don't find the fog romantic any longer. Stepping back into 50-degree weather was a wake-up call for me.
It felt so cold.
Yeah.
I had not felt that cold in a long time. And it's rain and cold at the same exact time, which is not something we do in Mexico anymore. Now our winter season is cold, but there's no rain, and our rainy season is in the summer. So yeah, rain and cold, I don't like it.
Yeah, usually the lows in San Miguel are very close to the highs in San Francisco, so there is that extreme difference in temperatures for us.
Yeah, we didn't realize just how much we had adjusted to warm weather until we went back to a place that was just cold and wet. So the question is, does it still feel like home?
Yeah, I mean, San Francisco still feels familiar to me. It's amazing how much of the city streets I remember. I still know how to get around.
Yes, you way more than I did, actually.
But yeah, it doesn't feel like home anymore.
From the time that I was born there to the time that we moved here in 2008, I was 38 years old. I'd never lived anywhere else besides San Francisco, and that was truly home.
Yeah.
And now we've lived here for 16 years, and Mexico feels more like home now.
I think you're right. Home is here in Mexico, but more than that, I think it's about where we are.
But going back always feels special because I get to see my family, because all of my family is still there, and my father, my cousins, my brothers, and so this last time that we went back, we really got to do some really quality, good family time. In fact, we don't really go back to San Francisco and play tourist. It's all about seeing the family, spending time with my father, and just getting that time in with them. But it also, when we go to San Francisco, reminds us why we left. That whole hustle and bustle and the faster pace of life and the keeping up with the Joneses and having to have the nice car and the nice house and live in the good neighborhood and all of those things was really exhausting.
Yeah, it was. There's nothing like that here, which is kind of a weight off our backs.
Yeah, we don't drive a new car, and we live comfortably, but we don't have a lot, but we're fine. It's okay.
Yeah.
So is everybody else.
One thing that really shocked us, though, was the cost of living.
Yeah, let's break that one down.
We expected it to be more expensive, but some of these prices have floored us. I mean, they are out of control.
For example, we thought 55 pesos, around $2.75 for a latte in San Miguel was getting kind of pricey actually for us here. But then we went to a neighborhood cafe in San Francisco and paid $3.75 for just a basic drip coffee, and not a large one, a small one.
Yeah. And coffee beans, a pound of non-gourmet coffee in San Francisco is $8. That's just about what we spend for an entire kilo of the nice stuff in San Miguel de Allende.
Yeah. We went out to eat with my brother at a neighborhood Mexican restaurant in his neighborhood where he lives out in the Sunset. What's the name of the street we were on?
West Portal.
West Portal. We went to an upscale Mexican restaurant. I know it sounds crazy that we went to a Mexican restaurant, but this is where my brother wanted to go eat, and so we joined him. And the flautas dish was $19. In San Miguel, the same dish would be anywhere from like $5 to $8.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge difference. And I know that they're paying way more rent and the staff and paying your employees and taxes and all of those things are completely different. And honestly, that's probably why the prices are so high.
Exactly. And breakfast, we picked up three breakfast burritos to take back to Antonieta's dad's house to eat. And we spent $60, $20 a burrito.
Yeah, and they were just breakfast burritos. They were not like San Francisco burritos, the big ones that you get. No, they were like breakfast burrito, not that big. You could easily eat it in one sitting.
Yeah.
It was not a big portion at all.
Granted, there is an egg crisis going on in the States, and
Yeah.
so maybe that had something to do with it, but
I have a feeling that's the normal price.
yeah. And if not, it's going to be the normal price moving forward,
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Meanwhile, in San Miguel, at a Tex-Mex restaurant, we'll spend about $7 for a big US-style burrito for dinner. And that's a massive difference.
Transportation costs really, really shocked us too. A short Uber ride in San Francisco can cost around $20.
Meanwhile, in Mexico City, Uber rides range from $3 to $8. And in San Miguel, we pay around 70 to 80 pesos for a taxi, about $3.50 to $4 for a ride anywhere in town.
And just to give you a price for that driverless car, I think it was like a 15-minute round trip, and it came out to be about $23. And then there's BART. A ride from the Oakland airport to San Francisco was more than $13 each.
That really, it blows your mind, considering that in Mexico City, the most populated city in North America, a metro ride is just 5 pesos, about 25 cents, and BART has gotten so expensive.
Yeah, can you imagine? So you can take a metro in Mexico City, anywhere in Mexico City, for 25 cents one way.
Yeah.
Compared to $13.
We actually did a whole video comparing grocery prices in Mexico versus the US, and the differences were shocking.
We've linked the video right here, so you can watch it after this one. For example, eggs, $12.99 for 18 eggs in San Francisco. And in San Miguel, $2.50 for the same amount.
Thank goodness, because we serve a lot of eggs in the morning to our guests.
Yep. It helps us keep our prices down at Antigua Capilla Bed and Breakfast.
Yeah.
Shameless plug.
I know. Overall, groceries in San Francisco were 217% higher than in San Miguel. And while we remembered paying less for groceries when we first moved here, we don't remember prices being this different.
Coming from Mexico, where things are more affordable, it's been shocking.
And while we expected higher prices, seeing them firsthand really put things into perspective for us.
But cost isn't the only thing that's been shocking. It's also the way people interact. And that's what we're going to talk about next.
One of the biggest contrasts we noticed on the trip was the difference between individualism in the US and the strong sense of community we've grown used to in Mexico.
Yeah, living in Mexico has really changed our perspective on that. Here, family ties and community responsibility come first. In San Francisco, we're reminded of how much American culture emphasizes independence.
And we've lived in Mexico for so many years now, but we still have some of that American individualism in us, for sure. I acknowledge that. For example, we prefer to plan ahead for visits, while in Mexico, unannounced visits are totally normal. But I would never go to a friend's house here in town and just knock on their door. I just wouldn't do it. I would find that to be rude.
Yeah.
But we asked a friend of ours who lives really close to Centro near the main square if he gets people knocking on his door for an unannounced visit. And he said all the time. And if somebody did that to us, I don't know if we would like it so much.
We might not answer the doorbell.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
In Mexico, it's not uncommon for people to just stop unannounced. And before you know it, you're sitting around the table for hours, drinking coffee, eating sweetbread, or even having a full meal.
And we just don't see that as much when we go back to the US.
Or at all, really.
Yeah.
One of the starkest examples of individualism in the United States is how homelessness is handled. In Mexico, even families with very little take care of their relatives, whether they're struggling with addiction, mental illness, or unemployment. In the United States, many are left to fend for themselves.
We see this firsthand with a young man in our neighborhood. He has drug issues, and in the US, he would most likely be living on the streets for sure, guaranteed, because he doesn't have a job and he just spends his time out sitting in front of his house all day, not doing very much. But in Mexico, his family keeps him at home, even with their limited resources. They're not gonna just let him go off into the street.
Yeah. And we're talking about, from our perspective, living in San Miguel de Allende, maybe other parts of Mexico are different, but that's what we see here. Another thing that stood out to us was how people take care of their neighborhoods. In Mexico, it's common to see people out on the street sweeping their section of the sidewalk in front of their homes every morning.
Every morning, everybody goes out and sweeps in front of their door and what's the front of their house. And then the next neighbor does their part. And so before you know it, the street has gotten swept every morning. It's just something that you do here. But in the US, we'd never think about doing that because the city takes care of it. Yeah.
It's a small but interesting difference in mindset. One is about personal responsibility, and the other relies more on government services.
One thing we love about San Francisco is how free people feel to express themselves, whether it's political beliefs, sexual orientation, or fashion.
Yeah, and while things are changing in Mexico, there are still certain social norms. For example, we've started seeing more gay couples holding hands in the street, but something as simple as wearing shorts, not so much.
At least not where we live. People just don't wear shorts here. Even on the hottest days, you'll see the locals wearing jeans, slacks, or long dresses. Shorts are mostly for the beach or super casual settings.
Yeah.
I mean, you do see occasional Mexican men out that are working and will be wearing like long shorts. It's just not common.
It isn't.
It's not common.
The contrast between individualism in the US and the strong sense of community in Mexico really stood out to us on this trip. It's something we've come to appreciate about living in Mexico. There's this feeling that people are more connected and look out more for each other.
Just the mere fact that here we all say hello to one another. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Yeah.
You don't walk by people and not say hello, even if it's a total stranger. And in the US, people don't even want to look in your eyes, like let alone look towards you. Everyone's like at their feet or walking straight, but nobody's looking at each other going, good morning.
Yeah.
That just doesn't happen.
I mean, I remember this from when we used to live in San Francisco still, and we lived in an apartment building, and we'd get into the elevator with our neighbors, and they would just walk right in and not make eye contact and look straight ahead.
Yeah.
And we would do the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just what we did, and now we can't. We'll go into an elevator full of strangers and we'll say good afternoon to people that we don't even know.
You probably think we're crazy,
Yeah.
but I don't know. It's part of who we are now.
Yeah.
And the community-oriented mindset even shows up in the way people eat together. Meals aren't just about food, they're about connection, about sharing time with loved ones and not feeling rushed. That brings us to another big culture shock that we had, how different dining and food culture feels in the US. One thing we absolutely loved about coming back to the US is the variety of food options. Oh my God, anything and everything you could possibly want is available.
Yeah, I mean, just for example, your neighborhood, your old neighborhood, just within a couple of blocks, you can find everything from Thai, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Salvadorian, Guatemalan, and of course, Mexican.
Yeah, and yet out of the 2 restaurants we visited on this trip, one of them was a Mexican restaurant. We didn't get to do as much Asian as we thought we were going to do.
And the other was Japanese, and it was amazing.
Oh, so good.
While this isn't something that shocked us, It's definitely something we always look forward to when we go back.
And something that always shocks us though is the portion sizes.
Yeah, we forget how big those portion sizes are in the US until we were served these massive plates of food. However, you know, if you were just to proportion the size of the food with the increase in cost, it's still more expensive than what you get in Mexico.
We've gotten so used to more reasonable portions in Mexico. In fact, the portions in Mexico are usually big enough to feed both of us, and we often just order one plate and we share everything. And in the US, it just feels like every meal could feed 3 to 4 people.
That's a discovery that we just made not that long ago. And we actually can go out more often now because we're saving. We're basically buying something that would be equivalent for one person and splitting it in two. And more often than not, we leave full and satisfied.
I know. The other day, we ordered one hamburger and one order of fries, and we split it. And at first, we said, is this enough? Is this gonna be enough? And it was. It was plenty. By the end of the half of my burger, I was full, and so were you. So
totally satisfied. And of course, tipping culture is different too. In Mexico, we tip around 15%, but it's customary to tip around 10%. In the US, it's 20% or more. And now some places are adding service, which then you tip on top of.
And everything you do, if you pay with a card, which, you know, who carries cash these days in the States? You pay everything with a card, and automatically it comes up, starting at 18%.
Yeah.
18, 20, 25, and you're like, whoa, that's a lot.
Yeah, and that's like at a coffee shop and places like that. You just don't see that here.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we haven't gotten to that point yet. Another thing that really shocked us was how fast-paced dining is here. In Mexico, meals are a social event, and you sit and you enjoy your time and no one rushes you.
But in the US, restaurants are all about efficiency. Waiters are quick to take your order, bring your food, and then before you know it, the bill is already on the table.
Well, I don't know if it's efficiency or if it's about making as much money in a day that you possibly can by turning tables over.
The fastest turnover,
Yeah.
You're right.
And at the Mexican restaurant that we went to in San Francisco, we were actually given a time limit. We never heard of this. It was really unusual. We had an hour and a half to eat and then leave. And we were constantly reminded that we had an hour and a half. And this is, it seems, well, I don't know if it's the norm, but it's definitely what we asked people. And they were telling us that since COVID, some restaurants started giving time limits, and they haven't really dropped that. And I think they figured out that that's just a way to make more money, especially for these very busy restaurants with high turnover rates.
Yeah.
So when my brother made the reservation, he didn't realize that there was a time limit of an hour and a half. So when we got there, the hostess sat us and said, oh, and please remember that you have an hour and a half to finish your meal. We're like, huh?
Yeah, that was ridiculous. And then we finished our main meal and we wanted dessert, and the waiter said, you've got 15 minutes left, just remember that.
He said to us, would you like dessert? But just remember that you have 15 minutes left.
Yeah, and then it took him how many, like 10 minutes to bring the dessert, and then we're stressing out because we have 5 minutes to eat.
It just seemed really strange to be looking at the time and eating your, dinner. And the table next to us was very upset because they were celebrating a birthday and they had a birthday cake and all of that, and they were just being rushed, and they didn't really even get to enjoy their birthday cake.
It was weird and shocking. We really want to understand if this is standard now, or if this particular restaurant was unique in this.
Or maybe just the big cities,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know. Let us know in the comments.
Yeah.
We're really interested to know.
Yeah, it's completely opposite in Mexico. We had guests at the B&B here in San Miguel de Allende go to a restaurant and see it completely empty and still be told that there was no table available. It makes no sense when you walk into a restaurant and it's completely empty and you ask for a table, it's like 6 o'clock, 6:30, and they'll say, oh, sorry, we're full with reservations, and it makes no sense whatsoever. But what we realized is if you sit down to eat at 6 o'clock, you might sit there for 2-3 hours and they have a reservation at 7 o'clock. And they're not gonna let you take that table from the 7 o'clock reservation.
It's important to understand when a Mexican diner gets the table is theirs. And they can't risk seating somebody if they have a reservation for later on in the evening.
Yeah, So then what we've learned to do, and it works sometimes, not every time, we'll just say, hey, we're just want to eat early. We'll be done in about 45 minutes and then we're out of here. We won't take your table for a couple of hours. And they'll say, okay, that's fine. And they'll sit us down and we eat quickly and we're out of there, and they still can make the 7 o'clock reservation.
Dining in the US is efficient, but in Mexico, it's all about experience. And honestly, we've come to love that slower, more relaxed pace.
At first, I remember thinking, why does no one bring our check?
We thought, oh man, this waiter's bad service.
Yeah.
What, you know?
Why are we not getting our check? I don't get it. And then we realized you absolutely have to ask for your check because they will never bring it unless you ask for it. So going back to the United States reminded us of just how different the food culture is. But beyond the food, this trip also brought up something we weren't expecting: how it felt to go back.
There was this strange moment of realization that even though we lived in the United States for so many years, it just doesn't feel like home anymore.
It's something that we don't think about much when we're in Mexico, but every time we go back, it does hit us in a new way. So let's talk about that. What it's like emotionally to return to a place that once was your home, but now feels different. One of the most surprising things about coming back has been the emotional aspect of it.
People often ask us if we miss home.
All the time.
Yeah.
Guests always ask us if we miss San Francisco.
Yeah, and the truth is, what we miss is what we left, but that was so many years ago, and that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, and what I really miss is just my family. I don't really necessarily miss San Francisco or the States. I just miss being able to see my family whenever I want to. But coming back now feels different. While it's always wonderful to visit family, San Francisco doesn't feel like home anymore. And home is wherever you are, and our home is here. This is our house, our space where we live, where we watch TV, and where we hang out. And we don't have a home in San Francisco anymore.
We don't. We're all in Mexico right now. San Miguel has been our home for so many years, but we could see ourselves moving to another place someday. We've always been explorers at heart, and for us, having a home base is important, but where that home base is, that's become less important over time.
As long as we have access to good medical care nearby, we're happy. As we get older, this is something that we really do think about. Those that watched our recent healthcare video will understand that part of it.
And we'll link that video so you can watch it later as well. It's really interesting. Our sense of identity isn't tied to where we live. We love experiencing different cultures, and the longer we've been away from the US, the more we've realized that certain traditions, like football barbecues, for example, just don't hold the same importance to us anymore.
We both have Latin American roots. We both speak Spanish and English fluently, and our customs are already a fusion of both US and Latin American traditions just because of the way we grew up in our households. And if we ever move somewhere new, we know that we'll take on parts of that culture too.
And we love experiencing different cultures and trying to adapt to the new environments that we're in. It makes me excited, more alive.
And that's the best part of travel too, is getting to experience and understand how other people live.
We love who we are, but more importantly, we respect the cultures we live in. One thing we've really embraced is understanding that there's more than one way to live, and all of them are valid.
Reconnecting with family and friends is always so special, and in some ways the time we spend together now feels even more meaningful than when we lived right next door.
Yeah, and honestly, with technology today, we're closer to many of them than we ever were back in 2009.
Every time we visit, it's a mix of emotions. We have nostalgia, gratitude, and sometimes even a little bit of relief when we return home.
This trip really made us reflect on how much we've changed over the years and what home truly means to us now.
So as we wrap up this journey, let's take a moment to reflect on everything that we've learned from this trip and what's next for us. Although this video is about reverse culture shock, it's really been about appreciating the differences between cultures.
Traveling, whether for a visit or a long-term move, should be on everyone's to-do list. Experiencing different cultures gives us a broader perspective on the world, and it helps us appreciate the many ways people live and see things.
This trip has only made us more eager to keep exploring. Stepping out of our comfort zone expands it, and the more we experience, the less unfamiliar things feel.
The saying, home is where the heart is, may be cliche, but it's absolutely true. For us, home is where we are.
And honestly, technology has made it easier than ever to stay connected with people that we love, no matter where we are in the world.
Right now, we don't see ourselves moving back to San Francisco.
And the world is such a big place, and there's still so much that we haven't seen that we want to see and experience.
As long as we're able, we plan to stay in Mexico for a while longer and continue exploring new places here and around the world.
This trip reminded us of how much we've changed, how much the world has changed, and how much more there is to explore.
And if you've ever thought about moving abroad or even just traveling somewhere new, we definitely encourage you go for it.
Which brings us to one final thought before we wrap up. What about you? Have you ever experienced reverse culture shock or noticed big changes when visiting a place you used to call home? Let us know in the comments.
And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. We share more stories about international living, cultural experiences, and life abroad, so stick around for more.
Bye, everybody.